Charles and David Koch didn't seek the spotlight, but behind the scenes, they built one of the largest private empires in history. Their company, Koch Industries, generates over $100 billion a year, more than Starbucks, even more than Netflix and Tesla combined. But how did two brothers transform a family business into one of the most powerful corporations in the world? This is the untold story of the Koch brothers. Chapter 1. A small-town boy with big dreams. Fred Koch's story didn't begin in an oil refinery or a corporate boardroom. It began in a small farm town in Texas, where he was just another boy growing up in a world where hard work wasn't a choice, it was survival. His father was a Dutch immigrant, a man who had built a life with his bare hands working as a printer. From an early age, Fred learned that nothing would be handed to him. His days were spent helping on the farm, fixing machinery, and learning to problem solve. But while other boys dreamed of ranching or small-town business, Fred's mind was elsewhere. He wasn't just a worker, he was a thinker, and that would change everything. For someone from his background, college wasn't expected, let alone MIT, one of the hardest schools to get into. From a young age, he was obsessed with machines, energy, and how things worked. By the time he was a teenager, he was already fixing farm equipment and redesigning small engines to work more efficiently. People in town started noticing his talent, but that wasn't enough to get into one of the best engineering schools in the world. So Fred worked relentlessly, taking on extra studies and pushing past every obstacle. And finally, after years of effort, he earned his place at MIT. It wasn't handed to him, he fought for it. But once he got there, that's when everything changed. MIT wasn't like anything Fred had ever experienced. Here, he was just another bright student. He was surrounded by some of the smartest minds in the world. Most students focused on theory, studying equations, memorizing formulas. But Fred, he wanted real-world solutions. And in the 1920s, nothing mattered more than oil. At the time, crude oil was the most valuable resource on the planet. It powered cars, industries, and entire economies. But there was a problem. Refining crude oil into gasoline was slow, expensive, and inefficient. The existing methods wasted huge amounts of energy, and the cost of producing gasoline was far too high. Fred saw an opportunity. What if there was a faster, cheaper way to refine oil? What if someone could build a process that produced more gasoline with less waste? No one had solved this problem before, but Fred was about to change that. Fred spent years researching, experimenting, and testing new methods. He studied heat, pressure, and chemical reactions, looking for ways to make refining more efficient. After endless failures and dead ends, he finally cracked the code. Fred developed a faster, cheaper, and more efficient way to refine crude oil. It used high-pressure distillation to break down crude oil into high-quality gasoline at a fraction of the cost. This wasn't just an improvement, it was a revolution. With this process, gasoline could be produced more efficiently than ever before. It could lower fuel costs, increase supply, and change the oil industry forever. Fred knew he had something big. He imagined oil companies lining up to use his technology. He was about to change the world, or so he thought, because that's when the fight began. The US oil industry was controlled by giants. Companies like Standard Oil and Texaco had near total control over refining, distribution, and sales. And when they saw Fred's invention, they saw a threat. His refining process would cut production costs drastically, making their older, more expensive methods obsolete. If Fred's technology spread, these companies stood to lose billions. So instead of adopting his invention, they tried to destroy it. They sued him for alleged patent violations. They blocked his refinery contracts. They used illegal loopholes to keep his process out of the market. Fred had just made the biggest breakthrough of his career, and no one would touch it. For most people, this would be the end. But Fred wasn't most people. If American oil companies didn't want his technology, he would find someone who did. So Fred left the country. He took his invention overseas, licensing his refining process to countries desperate for new energy solutions. His biggest client? The Soviet Union. At the time, Stalin's government was desperate to modernize its industry. Fred's refining process was exactly what they needed. So, despite rising tensions between the US and the Soviets, Fred Koch struck a deal to help build Stalin's refineries. It was a controversial move, but it made him a fortune. By the time he returned to the United States, he wasn't just an engineer anymore, he was a millionaire, and now he had the money to build something even bigger. Fred had learned a painful lesson. Innovation alone isn't enough. You need power, and power doesn't come from having the best technology. So, in 1940, Fred Koch founded Koch Industries, a small but powerful company specializing in oil refining, engineering, and industrial technology. Chapter 2. The Brothers Take Over. By the 1960s, Koch Industries was no longer just an oil refining company. Under Fred Koch's leadership, it had grown into a successful $177 million business. It wasn't yet the empire it would become, but it was a force to be reckoned with. Then, in 1967, Fred Koch passed away, and suddenly, his 4 sons were left with a choice. Who would take control? Who would carry the family name forward? 4 brothers, 1 throne. The oldest, Frederick Koch, had never wanted any of this. While his fathers built refineries, he was in New York, collecting art and studying opera. Business bored him. The second-born, Charles Koch, aged 32, had prepared for this moment his entire life. His father had trained him, tested him, and drilled into him a single belief: win or be crushed. The youngest, Bill and David Koch, aged 27, twins, alike in face, but not in mind. Bill was hot-tempered, impulsive, and hungry for power. David was calculating, strategic, more like Charles. And now, with their father gone, they were left with one question: who would run the empire? Fred Koch had always known which of his sons was worthy. Years before his death, he made it clear. He saw Frederick as weak, Bill as reckless, and David as intelligent, but not a leader. That left one option: Charles. Fred had trained him since childhood, harder, harsher, pushing him past every limit. And now, with his father gone, he had to prove himself again, because his brothers wouldn't hand him control without a fight. And with that, the family divide was set. Charles and David versus Bill and Frederick. The war for Koch Industries had begun. What came next would tear the family apart. At 32 years old, Charles Koch wasn't looking for power. He had already built a career outside the family business. After graduating from MIT with multiple degrees in engineering and management, he had job offers from Wall Street firms, top consulting companies, and energy giants. To the outside world, he looked like a man destined for his own path. But when Fred Koch died, Charles was faced with a decision that would define his future. Koch Industries wasn't just a company, it was his family's legacy. And if someone else took over, that legacy could disappear forever. So Charles made a choice. He would take control. At 32 years old, he became CEO of Koch Industries. And from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Most people saw Koch Industries as just an oil company, but Charles, he had a different vision. Oil refining was only one piece of a much bigger game. Instead of just selling oil, what if they controlled every part of the process? What if, instead of just being an energy company, Koch Industries became something bigger? This wasn't just a business strategy, it was an empire-building blueprint. And over the next decade, Charles transformed Koch Industries into something no one expected. Under Charles's leadership, Koch Industries stopped being just an oil company. The first major expansion came when he pushed into pipelines. Koch built and acquired massive pipeline networks, ensuring they controlled oil transportation from start to finish. Chemicals and materials. They moved into producing fertilizers, plastics, and industrial chemicals, products that powered entire industries. Commodities trading. They didn't just sell oil, they began trading wheat, metals, and natural gas, becoming key players in global markets. Consumer products. They expanded into paper, packaging, and textiles, acquiring companies like Georgia Pacific, the maker of Brawny paper towels and Dixie cups. This was unheard of. Most companies specialized in one area. Koch Industries was dominating multiple industries at once. And while Charles was building an empire, a war was brewing inside his own family. Charles wasn't the only Koch brother who wanted control. His younger brothers, Bill and Frederick, had their own ideas about how the company should be run, and they didn't like the risks Charles was taking. What started as small disagreements soon turned into a full-scale war for power. Bill Koch led the charge. He accused Charles of mismanaging the company, taking dangerous business risks, and locking him and Frederick out of key decisions. At one point, Bill tried to stage a takeover of Koch Industries. For years, the brothers fought in secret. Lawsuits, betrayals, and boardroom battles ripped the family apart. It became one of the most brutal corporate feuds in history. The fight dragged on for nearly 2 decades, costing the family hundreds of millions in legal fees. But in the end, Charles and David Koch won. They forced Bill and Frederick out, securing total control of Koch Industries. The message was clear. This wasn't just a family business anymore. It was a global empire. And Charles and David, they weren't just running a company. Chapter 3. The expansion that changed everything. By the 1980s, Koch Industries had become a dominant force in oil and commodities. But Charles Koch wasn't satisfied. Being big wasn't enough. He wanted Koch Industries to be so powerful, so deeply embedded in the economy that no competitor could touch them. This wasn't about growth anymore. This was about total control. And to achieve that, Koch Industries had to expand into industries no one expected. Most billionaires focus on one thing: tech, banking, real estate. But Charles and David Koch, they played a different game. Instead of staying in oil and refining, they expanded into industries no other energy company dared to touch. And their strategy? Control the supply chain. Instead of just producing oil, Koch Industries began acquiring the companies that used oil-based materials. Chemicals and manufacturing, they bought companies that produced fertilizers, synthetic materials, and plastics. Pipelines and transport. They took over entire transportation networks, pipelines, and storage facilities to move raw materials worldwide. Consumer goods. Instead of just selling industrial products, they moved into paper towels, cups, fabrics, and household goods. Every move they made gave them more power over the industries they touched. They weren't just selling materials, they were controlling industries from start to finish. And then, in 2005, they made the biggest move of all. In 2005, Koch Industries made a decision that no one saw coming. They acquired Georgia Pacific, one of the largest paper and packaging companies in the world. The price tag? $21 billion. It was one of the largest private acquisitions in U.S. history, and overnight, Koch Industries became a household name, without most people realizing it. Now, Koch Industries wasn't just in oil, chemicals, and raw materials, they were in people's homes. And the best part? Since Koch Industries was a private company, they never had to answer to public investors. No stock market, no quarterly reports, no one could see their moves until it was too late. This wasn't just a business empire anymore, it was a fortress. But with great power comes great enemies. And soon, the Koch brothers would face the biggest battles of their careers. Chapter 4. A billion-dollar empire under attack. For decades, Koch Industries had been unstoppable. They had no shareholders, no public disclosures, and no one to slow them down. But with power comes enemies. And soon, the Koch brothers found themselves facing their biggest threats yet. Some came from outside forces, others came from inside their own empire. And for the first time, Koch Industries wasn't sure if it could survive. Running one of the largest private companies in the world means navigating a complicated, high-stakes world of business deals. Koch Industries found itself under intense scrutiny. They faced multiple legal battles related to their operations, everything from environmental lawsuits to regulatory investigations. And at one point, the pressure was so high that some questioned whether Koch Industries would survive the decade. But Charles Koch wasn't a man who backed down. Instead of slowing down, he doubled down. He restructured operations, fought off legal challenges, and made sure no external force would ever threaten their empire again. And it worked. One by one, the cases were settled, dismissed, and in the end, Koch Industries came out stronger than before. While outsiders were attacking Koch Industries, another war was brewing on the inside. The family feud between the Koch brothers wasn't over. Bill and Frederick, the two brothers who had been forced out years earlier, weren't done fighting. For years, they had watched Charles and David turn Koch Industries into one of the most powerful corporations in the world, and they wanted their cut. What followed was one of the most expensive, brutal legal battles in corporate history. Bill Koch launched a massive lawsuit against his brothers, demanding a multi-billion-dollar payout. For Charles and David, this was more than just a lawsuit. This was personal. The battle dragged on for years, costing the family hundreds of millions in legal fees. And for a while, it looked like the company could be torn apart. But in the end, Charles and David won again. Bill and Frederick were forced to accept a payout, and the family war was finally over. And now, even the smartest businessmen can't predict everything. And in 2008, when the global economy collapsed, Koch Industries faced its greatest test yet. While major corporations crumbled under the weight of the financial crisis, Charles and David made a decision that shocked everyone. Instead of pulling back like other companies, they expanded. They bought up struggling assets, acquired businesses at bargain prices, and strengthened their supply chains while competitors were panicking. It was a high-risk move, but when the markets recovered a few years later, Koch Industries emerged stronger than ever. They had proven once again that they could survive anything, and from that moment on, nothing could stop them.